Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller, an ordained New Thought minister and author of 25 books. She hosts a radio program, Noetic Moments, on KXCR.net, explaining what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be different if we understood it. As the spiritual leader of Ocean Unity, Reverend Miller provides classes, counseling services, and regular Sunday talks. Today, Reverend Miller asks, what does it mean to be in service? What does it mean to join the service or to serve the Lord? To serve the Lord, to serve her humanity. She says there's much more going on than simple definition. Please welcome Reverend Miller as she explores these questions and more. Now I'll leave the scene.
Just a cane, yay!
Well, it works for short distances.
That's great.
Not going to go on a marathon with a cane.
Well done.
The miracle of healing is always a delight to observe, isn't it? Mhm. Oh, thank you again, Linda, for that song. That was very powerful and just a wonderful thing to experience. And we need to thank Linda and Laura for the amazing work on the walls. They came in this week and put that together. And the primary goal was to make it so the sound works a little better for folks. And I do believe it is working. Am I right?
It is.
Woohoo! Excellent. No, they're acoustic squares. And there's going to be a couple more things around to do even more work. So we really benefited. Thank you so much. So the word for the month has been service, and I'm going to guess that nobody stopped to define the word. Am I right? Yeah, it's kind of, I seem to be the one that plays with the words. Okay. So, it's an odd word because it comes sort of from the Latin, sort of through the French, and has meant a whole lot of different things. And we're not sure where the Romans got it because it isn't in the Greek at all. So, and the concept that it has evolved with the word. So it appears that it was first used by the Etruscans to talk about shepherds. To watch and guard is to serve. Isn't that interesting? And then the Etruscans, for those of you who don't know, were the first occupants of the region that is now where the city of Rome is. And so, a lot of what is in Roman thought and action has grown from the Etruscan culture. And so the Romans didn't have sheep when they arrived, but the Etruscans did. So they used the Etruscan word for guarding the sheep. That kind of makes sense. But there was another thing going on, and that was the possibility that one could go to the local prison, and if someone were in there for their debts, one could pay off their debts, and now they owed you 7 years of their life. And so there wasn't a name for that, but that person was going to be guiding and leading to good food and providing, whatever resources you needed or helping you do that or whatever. So somehow the word for shepherd got transferred to the person that one acquired by paying off their debts at prison, or if you were a soldier, by picking them up while you were in a war, and inviting them into your home to be part of your family and to make sure your needs are met. So we go from serva in the Etruscan to service or servicio or servitium, depending on the form of the verb being used or the noun being used in the Roman world, which then the French picked up as the Romans moved up across Europe. And so we're getting that shift. And part of the reason we're getting that shift from someone who is taking care of me, someone who is guarding me, someone who is protecting me, someone who is making sure I have everything that I need, to someone I can tell them what to do and I own them, right? Because that word shifted to mean what we call slave today. So it went from they're caring for me to they are obedient to me. Now, how did that happen? I think we get to blame the Hebrews for that. Because in the Hebrew tradition, that also was true. If someone were over their head in debt, one could pay off their debts and they would come into the household, and now they would be obedient to the person who paid off their debt and brought them into their household. Now, the difference between the Jewish tradition and the Roman tradition is the Romans forgot the 7 years. The Jews kept the 7 years. This is a 7-year thing. And at the end of 7 years, if one became attached to the household or didn't feel like there were any better options in life, or if for some reason the debts that were paid were the 7 years didn't even begin to pay for the debts that had been paid off, then a person might choose to stay with someone for the rest of their life. And this is a bond servant. That's where that name, that word comes from, a bond servant. So someone has chosen to be the bond servant of someone else. And the way they would declare that they were a bond servant is they would have a brand put on their forehead representing that. And in the book of Revelation, we are told that the number on their forehead is 666. Nobody knows exactly what that means, but in the Hebrew letters, it comes out as the name of Kaiser Nero. But since John wrote that in Greek, we don't know that that's what he intended at all. But nonetheless, to have a brand on one's forehead says that I have dedicated my life to be obedient to this person who has redeemed me, who has paid off my debt. We've never heard that language anywhere else before. My Redeemer. So Peter and James, and sometimes Paul, but definitely Peter and James, refer to themselves in their letters as bondservants to the Lord, and they're referring to Jesus when they say the Lord. They have declared their whole lives to be obedient to what they understand Jesus wants from them. And sometimes they get a sense of that, as in our song when she said there was this voice and it said, home is here. And by the way, when she described that, she described my experience completely. And I'll tell you about that in a moment. But I'm sure some of you also have had that moment. In fact, I'll just do that right now since I brought it up. When I was in my healing process, one of the things that I would hear from the voice that was my guide during that time was sing a new song. And I would hear it over and over again. And it's part of why, as much as I love to sing, you'll rarely hear me sing along with a popular tune, because most popular tunes are not reinforcing our principles. They're actually fighting our principles. So very rarely will you hear me even listening to most music because I know all the words. So I don't even listen to that. So sing a new song was part of my healing process. And as I had completed the physical healing, there was that yearning for home and that sense that I really didn't want to be in all this stuff that we're experiencing. And I wanted to be in that light and that love that I knew home was. And literally in the dark time of just, not having any sense of anything else, the kids were old enough now that it didn't matter so much that I be on the planet, I thought. They showed me otherwise, but at the time I didn't think it did. And yet the voice, same voice, came through and said, your job is to experience that heavenly home here. That's what you are here to do. So sing a new song in bringing forth heaven on your earthly experience, in your earthly experience, through your earthly experience. So I want to thank all of you for all the ways you helped me make that happen. So back to this word of being in service, over the years, about every 100 years, it has changed. The term has changed. So I'm being obedient to when I join the military service. Service in the military is not about what they're doing for others. Wasn't originally and hasn't been for most of its life. Service in the military is saying, okay, I'm agreeing to be obedient to. And in fact, the pledge that you take when you sign up, if you're enlisted, you say, I will obey all of my orders that I am given by my officers, period. I am obedient. As an officer, this is a little different. Most people don't know that officers in the military buy their own uniforms, often buy their own weapons. They have to pay for their housing. See, that doesn't happen if you're enlisted. All that's provided. But an officer pledges to obey the Constitution, uphold it and protect it, and sometimes disobey the orders if necessary to do so. So a second lieutenant has the option of saying, no, Mr. Colonel, no, Mr. General, no, sir, I cannot do that because it is against the Constitution. But he has to prove it if he's going to, or she is going to do that. So to be in the military, one is agreeing to obey. Yes. And that became service. Now, I say that as someone who, in those longer American branches of my family, have had family in every single war in the American history since before the Revolution. Every single option for being on active duty, my family has been there. It's kind of amazing. Every generation, almost, skipped one or two. So we've always in my family felt that call to obey, and the belief was we were doing so in my family. My mother, who was a petty officer in the Navy during World War II, teaching flight gunnery. Yeah. And she taught it as, yes, we are in service to humanity by choosing to obey. And we trust that our officers will follow the Constitution. And that was what I grew up with. And then I married an officer in the Navy. So it's continuing. My daughter was an officer in the Army. Her husband was a petty officer or a sergeant in the Air Force. So we have a lot of that going on. But it's always in service to humanity. But that's a totally different version of the word service, isn't it? It's a totally different understanding of what service means. That's not about obedience. That's about somehow doing what our daily word reading said today. Acting out of love for the good of another. And that's how it's been in my family. And that's what I think we're all called regularly to do. But that understanding of the word service didn't come into use until 1200 AD or BC, CE, if you're into that. So the idea that one is obeying got moved along. And part of it is because of the concepts presented in the Daily Word today. Because if I am obeying that which is good, we call God good, the omnipotent good. If I'm obeying that, then I am acting in ways out of the love that good is, that is more good for all beings. So the outcome of being in service, serving the Lord, if you will, obeying the divine good is that everyone around me benefits. I think that's kind of cool. Now, somewhere in between there, between that military understanding of service as obedience and that slavery understanding of service as obedience, came up this other piece, and that is partly because of the Nicene Council in the beginning of the church. And in that world, one has a Sunday service, one has a mass, one has an observation of the presence and love that we hold for the divinity. Where did that fit into all of this? Well, we're looking at that at approximately 900 to 1000 AD. It isn't showing up much before that. And the whole idea there is that we are obeying the Lord by doing this in remembrance of me, which is what Jesus says during the Last Supper when he's blessing the bread and the wine. So doing this in remembrance of me is what we are obeying Lord Jesus by doing in that ceremony. So it is the Sunday service or the morning service that is going on here, depending on what day of the week we're going on. So that then became the basis for what we are doing here. And we believe that we are obeying the divine by not doing all those things, which is kind of interesting. But part of that is because the people who helped to establish unity and the other New Thought denominations understood several things. For one thing, that line, do this in remembrance of me, is built into the Jewish Passover Haggadah. He was just reciting what is always said at Passover. It's part of the Seder script, which is followed pretty closely in most households. It's from the book of Exodus, where Yahweh is telling the Hebrews, okay, I've got you out of there. Now feast every year at this time, the spring equinox, in remembrance of me getting you out of Egypt. That's what it is. But the folks by 325 AD who were predominantly non-Jewish, I don't think there's any Jewish in the Nicene Council. I don't think there was anyone coming from a Jewish background. Had no idea. They thought this was a commandment. So by Jesus, and so they were doing that. So they created this thing that is called the Mass or the Eucharist or communion, which is a reenactment of the Last Supper, which I discovered when I was spending Friday evenings with my Jewish family, and I heard them reciting in Hebrew and saw the translation, identical to what I had heard Catholics say in Latin, and I saw the translation. I went, oh my goodness. Every Friday night, they're saying the same blessing of the bread and wine as every Sunday morning in a Catholic church. All right, so the celebration of public religious worship according to prescribed forms or methods, it's the prescribed piece that makes it service there. And that then becomes a shift from I am standing forward and I am agreeing to be obedient and I am being obedient to, oh my goodness, I am subservient, I have to do homage. So by the 1800s, we have people who are in service and everyone else. It's not so much slavery anymore in Western Europe, in England, in the US. It is now, I'm working for you. I am employed in service or I'm employed in something else. Okay? And if you are employed in something else, usually you own your own business because it's hard to, the size of businesses was not sufficient to have a lot of workers employed. It was our family doing this business. So if you go to Europe or England or Ireland or any of those places, which I had the joy to be in England and Ireland recently, The household is the business. The home lives there, the tannery or the bakery or the blacksmith or the whatever is there, the mill, whatever. It's all one establishment. And there might be one or two people coming in to help, but they are there in service. They are not there as part of the family. They are not there as employees. So it happened when Linda and I were talking about putting together today's service, today's program, that I was out on the road very shortly thereafter. And often when I'm on the road, someone has a television on. And someone had a television on with an old episode of Downton Abbey, which is in large part about the issue in the 1920s of being in service. What are the limits? What are the boundaries? What is acceptable? What isn't? I mean, one of the daughters of the Duke and Duchess is marrying a guy who had been in service to them. Oh my goodness, right? So the episode that was on started with one of the maids trying to get something moved up on top of the cupboard in the room that she sleeps in. And her roommate comes in and is just furious that she's up there. What are you doing with my things? And she's saying, I'm just trying to make more room up here. What is this heavy thing? Well, it turns out that the roommate is learning how to use a typewriter. And they actually had a 1920s typewriter. It was beautiful. And the maid is, one of the regular maids is going, I don't understand. Why are you trying to learn how to do this? I don't want to live in service any longer. She said, well, what will you do? I'll be a secretary. Well, at dinner that evening, the whole thing has been brought up. And the Dowager Duchess, the great Maggie Smith, says, I can't understand why anyone would choose not to be living in a beautiful home like this with all their needs met and go live in a ratty little apartment and work in a dark, dingy office. But she's an independent person if she's not in service. She doesn't have to be obedient to the householders. She gets to make her own choices. And that is huge. I love the way synchronicities work. I love the way my life works. I start thinking about how I'm going to talk about service, and this TV show shows up, right? So how do we serve without going into that subservient, I am subject to you kind of status? Because that's really the issue in many people's minds. How do we take a job without having to put up with what the boss is all about? How do we be volunteers without giving up our autonomy, right? When all of these things that I have said about the word serve and service are built into our awareness, whether we know it or not, they are part of the cultural norm and expectations. Well, one of the things that happened as this began to shift and change, as this word began to shift and change over time, is the idea that something would be sufficient or adequate, that will serve. That's adequate. That will serve. That will do the job, right? So that began to help make that shift out of it's not okay to be in service to I can meet the need when I serve. And so when that happens internally, then someone who is living in service, as in Downton Abbey, for example, the butler, he is perfectly fine and perfectly autonomous and has worked his way to the point where he can be because he is committed to this concept of meeting the need, that he is able to meet whatever need arises. It serves, it does the job, to be useful, to be beneficial, to be suitable for the function. Now that's satisfying, isn't it? When we know that we have done that. And in fact, I think I heard words like that at our board meeting yesterday, how when we get to be part of something like this, we can feel that we have been useful, we have been beneficial. And that is really what it is that we're looking for in our own lives when we agree to serve, right? Is to have that feeling of, I've accomplished something here, I've made a difference here, I've been beneficial in the world. And that is a large part of why my family keeps going back in the military every generation, because of the belief that somehow they will be beneficial in the world. Now, I did look up a whole bunch of interesting quotes that I thought you might enjoy around this idea of service from this understanding. How can I be beneficial in the world? What in me, what gift in me wants to be expressed in a way that my community is benefited? She said she would sing when in the song. I love it, right? And there is a gift each of us brings. And that's something that is taught in every spiritual tradition, that each of us is a unique gift just by being who we are. It's not necessarily something we do. And we are called to be in different places, being that gift. And that gift may be sweeping floors, right? One of the things I was aware of, was it only yesterday? No, it was Friday. But thank you, Herc. And thank you, Laura. Both of you handled that piece. On Friday, I was asked to visit someone who is having her first week in an assisted living facility, and I was invited to dinner. And a young man came in, and he was going to make sure that we had our needs met. He was there to serve us. And he was clearly someone who would not be employed in many other environments. He would have been declared mentally unable to do this work. But he was joyfully and very effectively meeting our needs and benefiting us. And I just so appreciated that, because we've lost that in our culture, that every one of us has a gift. There was a young man with Down syndrome, he used to be the bagger at Safeway, right? And yeah, I think that was the one in Lincoln City. I'm sure there are others, but he was up in Lincoln City. Yeah, and he was there for decades. I only knew him for 1 decade, but he was there for a long time. And when he passed, the whole city mourned. Yeah, yeah, because he was such a gift. He was such a benefit. His service lifted everyone, indeed. So as we look at that and what that can be for the people around us, just being who we are, one of the things that came up in my search for quotes, is Gillian Anderson. That's the gal in X-Files. She says, be of service, whether you make yourself available to a friend or coworker or make time every month to do volunteer work, there is nothing that harvests more of a feeling of empowerment. When we are able to bring our gift in a way that is serving the needs, is meeting the needs, is adequate and uplifting another. Henry Ford used to say, a business that is entirely devoted to service need not worry about profits. They will be embarrassingly large. Agmandino, the success guy, says, always render more and better service than is expected of you, no matter what your task may be. Now, he got that from the guy who wrote The Science of Growing Rich, Wallace Wattles, and Napoleon Hill also, and Earl Nightingale. They all say basically that wherever you are, provide far more than they expect, because you will get what you need out of that, right? Then Leo Tolstoy, some of you may remember that huge book that you tried to wade through in your 20s. Joy can only be real if people look upon their life as a service and have a definite object in life outside themselves and their personal happiness. Someone came up to me the other day who's involved in another congregation, and she said, I think I'm seeing far more cases of dementia in the last couple of years than I have seen in my whole lifetime. And we agreed that there were three components to that. And one of them is nutrition. We've been fed a lot of food-like products and not a whole lot of food in our lives. One of them is exercise. We spend a lot of time sitting in front of screens. Previous generations didn't have those screens to sit in front of. The third, though, is that we do not have an active life in service after a certain point in our lives. We're told, you're retired now, go have fun. And what I have known and observed over the last 30 years in the ministry is all of the folks who get out and do things for other people are still going strong in their 90s, their late 80s and 90s. They're healing, they're getting, moving on in life. They are not curling up in a corner and withdrawing from the world, which is really what dementia is. It's just saying, I've had it. I don't even want to think about that anymore. It is too scary, too much. But if you keep serving, you keep offering, if you, as Leo Tolstoy said, have a definite object in life outside ourselves, that's what the current understanding and what I believe unity is encouraging us to feel of the word service. Now, recently, Queen Elizabeth II passed away, and a number of you may have heard that very young 23-year-old, when she suddenly became queen, she was not expecting it. And in fact, one of the writers of one of the programs, movies, stories, TV shows about her life, has her saying to Philip, I am so sorry, I thought we'd have more years together. But what she said in public is, I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Until she was 93, that woman was out there showing up and helping open this and close that and, launch this and whatever. She was riding a horse on her 93rd birthday. I love it. I love it. Her father had said, the highest of distinctions is service to others. From the king of a country that still has people who consider themselves subservient because they live and work in service. That was in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s that he said that, and it began to turn around. In fact, those kinds of ideas that service is a distinction, is an honor, actually helped lead to the civil rights movement, but that's another talk. There is a woman who was active in helping create the civil rights movement. She was an African American whose grandparents were slaves, who acquired some land, so she grew up on a farm in North Carolina that her family owned. And she was the youngest of 15 kids. And she managed to get to school, and she managed to get degrees, and she became a teacher. And everywhere she went, she would establish another school, usually for Negro girls. And at some point, Eleanor Roosevelt discovered what she was doing before Franklin was elected, but began to rely heavily on Mary McLeod Bethune for advice on how to assist and reach out to and support the African American community. At which point, Mary McLeod Bethune became a Democrat. And at one point, this is something I didn't ever hear about until I was starting to do this work to prepare for today. She became the director of the National Youth Authority, which is part of the New Deal, African American Youth Division. She was paid a salary by the US government and had an office and had several employees, all of whom were African Americans. And she was an advisor to the president and helped establish programs so that African American youth could be assured of an education. In fact, she established apparently 5,000 scholarships for people to get through college who wouldn't have otherwise, and established 2 colleges in the southeastern states of the US. She was in her later years awarded an award from Liberia for all the work that she had done in this country. She was amazing. And she has, a very simple line. Faith is the first factor in a life devoted to service. Without it, nothing is possible. With it, nothing is impossible. And I think I will end on that note. Service done with love and faith accomplishes the impossible. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's nice. And today I remember we're going to do a meditation. Such a gift. Such a gift to be able to come together in a place like this, to feel the connection, to be reminded of the truth of our being, to feel the presence of the love, of the good that is everywhere present, to feel the joy and the appreciation and the gratitude that opens us to more and more experiences of the good, to begin to know at a deeper level that which we have always known, that our life here on earth is a process of experiencing more and more heaven. And that heaven is within us, ready to be experienced around us and through us as we allow the gift that we are to be expressed wherever we feel called, wherever we can possibly be of benefit, regardless of what it may return to us immediately. Because we know that simply being the gift that we are is the gift that brings us more closely to the heaven that is everywhere. So let us breathe and feel that. Let us know in our hearts the joy and the gratitude that is growing in us simply because we are being, simply being. As we breathe, as we rest in these bodies, in this chair, allowing this beautiful Mother Earth to sustain and support us as she always has. We breathe and know that good is. And as the breath moves in and through the body, and as we breathe out and release any other ideas, we accept this truth of our being now. And we commit ourselves to a life henceforth in which the joy of service is meeting the need, is beneficial for all, through us, as us, for us. For so it is, and so I say, Amen. And take a cleansing breath.